Moshi. Let's talk about the future. I'm Kristy Bird MaKieve. I'm the CEO and founder of Evergood Podcast. And this is a space where we like to talk about all things healthcare, education, innovation. And today we're going to focus a little bit more on medical education, I think, but we can expand into other areas of healthcare. And I'm very proud to have Dr. Ted O'Connell of Kaiser Permanente, Northern California, with us today. He is the Director of Medical Education and as well the Associate Clinical Professor at UCSF School of Medicine. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ted.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kristy. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you.
Yeah. I have so enjoyed watching from, a far distant corner, all the things that Kaiser has done in recent years. I'm curious where the genesis was of let's just start with the medical school that was formed in the last 5, 6 years, I think, in Pasadena, Southern California. I'm always interested in how organizations make a big picture plan and then go for it, right? So I'm curious if you could start with sort of the background.
Sure, I can talk about that a little bit. It will probably be fairly broad strokes because the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, the Bernard J. Tyson Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, really was a Southern California initiative. And the way Kaiser Permanente is structured is Southern California and Northern California are two separate medical groups. And so I was not particularly involved with the development of the School of Medicine, but I've been following it along for many years. It was probably 6 to 8 years in the making, at least from the beginnings of an idea before everything was put together and funding was approved. And now, as you said, the school's been functioning for 5 or 6 years now. But it was really a small cohort of medical educators who thought that Kaiser Permanente really should be involved in that aspect of medical education. And we have such a robust presence in residencies and medical schools, but residencies and fellowships, but don't have our own medical school. And what better way to really be on the national map for the continuum of medical education than to do that?
And so it started, what was the size of the first class?
I believe they are 48 students per class, so just a little bit under 200 students total in the student body. And they may be increasing a little bit. I'm not actually sure, but 48 was the original class size.
Yeah. So that really, in my mind, put Kaiser as a leader in the medical education space because, it's a big commitment and funding aside, it takes a whole cultural shift too to have physicians become faculty and when they weren't before. So just an exciting endeavor and excited to watch how it progresses. I know I'm selfish in saying it would be great to have one in Northern California, but that's probably a topic for another day.
Yeah, it probably is. The interesting thing with the development of the medical school in Southern California is Kaiser Permanente actually has a long tradition in medical education, dating now just under 80 years total. And we've had our physicians and our organization teaching medical students from throughout the state, from the UCLA, Loma Linda, all the medical schools in Southern California, and then also similarly, a lot of relationships with medical schools in Northern California. So they were really experienced and primed and, ready to do the clinical teaching. And it's really the first 2 years of the medical school where they needed to develop a curriculum, and they did that in quite an innovative way. But the organization was already very well positioned to just grow their medical education footprint when it comes to medical student education.
Thank you for explaining that, right? I think about the VA, which has the word education in its mission, and right, Kaiser's been teaching all along. Um, so great stuff. I think you were telling me some numbers recently about how many GME programs you have, and I mean, it's huge.
It really is. You mentioned the VA healthcare system, and Kaiser Permanente actually educates more medical students, residents, and fellows than any healthcare system in the country, other than the Veterans Administration that does a whole lot of that. So it really is quite large. In Northern California, we have 19 residency programs and 17 fellowships with just under 500 trainees in total. And that's all in Northern California. Southern California has a very similar footprint. And then we also have training programs in Hawaii and the Pacific Northwest and Mid Atlantic states. And I'm sure everyone's aware that Kaiser Permanente formed a new company called Risant that has acquired Geisinger, which includes a significant number of residency and fellowship training programs, plus their own medical school. So that footprint is getting larger and larger as time goes on. And then the interesting thing in Northern California alone, we actually see, we have, as I mentioned, about 500 of our own trainees. We see about 1,200 trainees from other university partners like Stanford and UC San Francisco, where their residents and fellows are coming in to gain clinical experience from our physicians. And then we get about 800 medical students every year. So, and that's Northern California alone. So it really is a significant undertaking.
Yeah, very impressive. I did not realize that you were right behind the VA and all of that. It's wonderful. And as I've been doing my own work, I've also realized that research is really important to medical education. They go hand in hand. And I know that Kaiser has a research arm as well. So that's awesome.
Yes, we have an entire division of research and actually have a whole lot of research output as an organization. But then within the medical education realm, we actually support a division of the Division of Research to provide statistical support and research program or analysts to support our residents and fellows in their scholarly work and research. And really what that helps is it helps support the accreditation of our residency programs and ensures that those residents and fellows who are either interested in academic careers or fellowships beyond their training have gotten that research experience that is really expected to be able to take next step in the academic environment.
Right. Very, very important. And it's all there. And then you also have your own population health data, right? You have your own data set that you don't have to necessarily go outside of the Kaiser system probably for understanding, certain areas have more likelihood of diabetes versus other areas with high blood pressure, and all of that, the ability to just look at larger data sets is incredible.
Yeah, we really do have a massive data set with our electronic medical records that is very valuable for research purposes and population care, et cetera. So, with about 4.6 million members in Northern California, and I think it's a similar number in Southern California, just the size of that data set, as you said, is very significant.
Problem.
Yeah.
Um, Also, I wanted to make sure that we talked about the future and what plans you wish to see or are in works. Are there other healthcare workforce education programs? And I guess the one thing I do want to talk about is the ACE-PC program with UC Davis, which is really innovative and a way to problem solve for a physician shortage in certain areas.
Sure, we can go down both of those paths if you want to. Yeah, go ahead and ask questions
Okay.
about future state or however you want to do that.
Yeah. So I'm always interested in knowing about what's being done now to make sure that we meet the physician needs of the future and other healthcare workforce needs. So I'm curious if you could speak to plans or ideas or what especially in Northern California, you might see coming down the pike.
I would be very happy to talk about that topic, Kristy, because there's a lot of planning underway. I'm sure, as your listeners are aware, there's we used to say a physician workforce shortage was looming, but it's really in effect now, and it's both nationwide as well as affecting California, and rural areas probably affected more significantly than the more urban centers. But we do have a physician workforce shortage, and we even see some of that within Kaiser Permanente, which is a well-regarded place to work and very competitive in the marketplace. We have been planning on an expansion of our residency and fellowship programs. It's actually been in the works for about 18 months now, and is I believe, coming close to a final decision on funding. But essentially what we're going to do is grow the number of physicians that we're training every year. And the intent is to go from about 500 per year and get that up to into the low 600s every year, and then look at it again in the next couple of years. And what we're doing, with the understanding that Kaiser Permanente is not just Northern California, but we're also looking at workforce needs for Southern California, Mid-Atlantic states, Pacific Northwest, et cetera, all the other places where Kaiser Permanente is in business, and trying to take a national or enterprise approach to this to really make it a coordinated effort. And in my mind, one of the things that we really need to be doing is really thinking about the continuum of medical education, with the understanding that we lose a lot of potential physicians and other healthcare workers early in the educational process, and that we should be promoting pathway programs into careers in medicine and healthcare in general, supporting those students right up through into medical school, and then being engaged in the medical school level education process, just as we are hosting rotations and being involved with the medical schools, and then bringing physicians on through into residency and fellowship programs, and then into the workforce. So we're really trying to take a very coordinated approach to all of this, and increase the number of physicians that are being created in this country every year.
Well, that's wonderful. And thank you for that because, yeah, it's going to take all of us. And I think one of the more innovative things that I've heard lately is Kaiser working with UC Davis on what's called the ACE-PC program, which is less than 4 years of medical school. And that's specifically only in the Northern California area, right?
To my knowledge, that particular program is only in Northern California, and it's actually specific to UC Davis. And we, as Kaiser Permanente Northern California, have partnered with them in those efforts. And it's been a terrific program. It's a small cohort of students who are specifically selected for the program. They aim to seek students who are interested in primary care specialties, and then really provide them a lot of mentoring and nurtured support along the way. So they get a lot of attention from their faculty, and really thrive in that. And part of the idea is accelerating the pace of medical school level education, because that, for one, it gets physicians into the workforce a little sooner, but also helps reduce educational debt by having roughly one less year of medical school. And I used to run a residency training program and was fortunate enough to help teach some of those students as they came through medical school. And we actually recruited two of them into the residency program, and they were fantastic residents. They're actually both physicians with Kaiser Permanente now, but just did a great job. So it's been very interesting to be to be part of that program and see it evolve.
And for the listeners who listen to this at some point, just to state that the students, when they matriculate into the UC Davis program through admissions, they are specifically choosing to go into primary care. And so then all of their education is preparing them for that. And then the residency program, I think, is family medicine at Kaiser.
It's family medicine and internal medicine in Kaiser Permanente. Yeah, we have a few sites in Oakland that are part of that as well. Oakland and I believe Santa Clara has been part of it.
Oh, good. Um, well, so those are, I mean, it's going to take all of these different efforts, right, to make sure that we have the physicians needed in the future. Exciting to hear about that in greater detail. Is there anything else that is something you want to highlight in terms of medical education?
Well, I think it's actually worth doubling down on this idea about what ACE-PC is doing. You know, that's at it's a relatively small program, but I'm sure your listeners may have heard that the federal government has recently been talking about capping the total amount of educational debt that one can have. And with that, there comes the potential impact that for students who don't come from families that may be able to afford to absorb some of that debt, that we may actually be adjusting the diversity of our healthcare workforce with these caps. And within that, I think we as a medical education community, we as a country need to be thinking about, well, what does that actually mean to not allow so much debt? You know, we think of large educational debt as being something negative, and you know, it really can be a burden for students. But putting a cap on it also really can impact somebody's ability to get through medical school. You know, and I think we're going to need to start thinking about different and innovative ways or models for how to create that medical school experience, whether it's 3-year programs. In some cases, you know, I don't know that a debt ceiling is reason to change the length of medical school, and we need to ensure that the cost per year of medical school doesn't just go up to, you know, because the schools need their revenues as well. But also thinking about other models like they have in Europe, where it's 3 years of undergraduate studies with then acceptance into medical school for sometimes 3 years. So it's a 3+3 or a 3+4 model, because that can reduce the amount of time and really allow students to focus in on what they're doing. So I think just thinking differently about what we're doing is something that we as medical educators need to do. And you know, we all know the data about outcomes and cost of the U.S. healthcare system, and you know, I think it just behooves us to be trying to rethink some of what we're doing.
Yeah. I have met many people myself, but also heard working in more rural areas that cost is a big deterrent, right? And there's families that say to their youth, their young ones, you know, don't becoming a doctor, it's too much, you know, just become a nurse or, you know, something else. It's not going to cost as much. And it's also not as lengthy of an education. Um, so, you know, I do think that removing hurdles is, you know, the best path to go. Yeah, if we can cap anything, of the expenses, it would be really good. But I also think it's very expensive to run a medical school, and making sure that there's compensation for physicians who are stepping away from clinical care and their RVUs to then have that time to teach. And I'm in the work that I'm doing in the Central Coast right now, that's a big question mark. It's, you know, we're asking physicians to do the clinical teaching for year 3, and they want to know how they're going to be paid. So it's a very good Yeah, there's a lot of discussions I think that need to happen and some other solutions too. But yeah, the 3 year, I love hearing about the 3+3 because I think there are some people who go into their bachelor's degree knowing that medical school is on their, radar and that's what they want to do, and helping them and not having duplicative or redundant teaching throughout their whole education journey is something really powerful too. Um,
Right. Yeah. I mean, speaking of duplicative, I would even think about, the first 2 years of medical school are very significantly about knowledge acquisition. And they always talk about trying to drink from a fire hose with the amount of information medical students need to ingest and process and, in some cases, memorize. But there's a lot of redundancy in the system where each medical school comes up with their own curriculum. And should we be thinking, should there just be a national curriculum around this is the knowledge that you need to gain? You still need to learn how to do the physical examination. You still need to learn how to do the doctoring part of it and talk with patients and families and understand ethics. But there's a large part of those first 2 years that I think could be standardized. And now with AI being out there, the physician of the future is really different than the physician that we are currently training. And there is much less need for memorization and more just need to understand the medicine and the systems in which we practice, because you can go out and get the information very quickly as long as you understand what's going on. So I would ask, should we be thinking about standardizing the first 2 years of medical schools across the country and really trying to reduce the costs somewhat that way? You said something very interesting earlier about exposing people to, it was in the setting of rural healthcare and people's exposure. I think that speaks to the importance of pathway programs so that youth can gain some of that exposure to healthcare, because we need physicians and we also need nurses and pharmacists and physical therapists and physician assistants and radiology techs. And I think in the ideal world, you expose people to as many of those as possible and let them find where their passions are. Find, somebody may want a shorter educational path for practical reasons, for expense reasons, for any number of reasons. So they may choose different paths based on that. Um, and I think that's one of the ways that we address the rural healthcare physician workforce issue or healthcare workforce issue is by exposing students from those areas to careers in healthcare, because they are more likely to return to their home areas once they go out and get their medical education, rather than taking somebody from San Francisco and trying to convince them to go to a rural area after they're finished with their training. So I think
right.
really thinking about these pathway programs in a robust way, I think would be good for our workforce issues.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think when my last work brought me up into Butte County and Glenn County, and Glenn is actually, I think, frontier. So there's rural and then there's more rural, which is frontier. And just hearing that there was one high school in Glenn County that had only four teachers, and the science teacher was agricultural science. And there was so there, you're basically saying that there's this body of students that is not going to have the biology classes and the things that are needed in order to go into healthcare. Um, right? So they're graduating from high school, but they're not actually taking those steps that are needed to go into healthcare, and they might want to. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of I think you mentioning the national curriculum for medical school. There's also a need to have more standardized high school pathways for healthcare and into community college and four-year colleges. And I'm not a person. I like freedom and I like people to have their own uh, you know local interests designed into their curriculum, but there are some commonalities, and without those, I think there are some potential students that we're missing in terms of that recruitment into healthcare. Uh, I don't, you know, there's sometimes all it takes is a biology teacher who's really passionate and sees something in a youth that is that they might not see them themselves, that becomes that doctor of the future. So yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot.
No, I agree with you 100%. And you know, that's why it's important also on these pathway programs to have them at every level. So if a student comes out of high school not having the necessary prerequisites to go to a 4-year university, that they can go to a community college and continue to get that support and mentorship and exposure so they can see what their potential opportunities are. But it's at that level that then they can take the classes that they need to then go pursue pre-medical studies or pre-nursing or whatever it is that they're interested in, but to make sure that we don't create these gaps along the way where we lose people who might otherwise go into these careers.
I'm just going to share one data point that I heard. I was in Santa Cruz the last couple of days of last week, and California ranks like 42nd in the state, I'm sorry, in the country for medical schools per population. So we actually have, I think, the second most number of medical schools in the country of any state. However, it does not meet the needs of the people of California in terms of sheer number. So there's lots of room for new medical schools.
Oh, there definitely is plenty of room. We have quite a few medical schools, but the population of California is so large, and even if you think about our geographic spread and how large we are, you take a city like Philadelphia, and there's numerous medical schools just in that city, and similarly Boston and New York, and we are much more distributed. But yeah, you're right. For per capita, the number of medical school slots in our state is actually quite low. I actually have an interesting story related to that. When I was uh, a pre-med college student, I went and spoke with my advisor, and I was going to college in the Midwest. And I expressed an interest in returning to California, where I was from, to go to medical school. And this advisor said, well, I don't think California needs any medical schools because everybody just will go to medical school wherever and then go back to California because that's where they're from and where they want to be. And I thought that was a pretty absurd thing to say. Um, but it's true even to this day. Like a lot of Californians go out of state to get their medical education
They have
and
to.
then seek to come back for their residency training or fellowship training, or even after they're finished to come back and work. But we have a very significant opportunity to educate more of our own, and be really nice to see some of the UC system, the state schools, be even more engaged in that than they already are.
Yeah, I think there's an interest in that, in developing those
Mm-hmm.
new schools or branch campuses and other things. I think the state has a pretty good recognition that more needs to be done. Um, so that's it. I don't know. I'm excited about the next few years and all of these new ideas of just really um, making it less difficult to advance into medical education and become a doctor. You know,
Yeah, one of the big things that Amazon does is they try to decrease the friction of every moment that you're on their website that lead or their app
right.
that leads to a purchase. They don't want to have anybody falling off at the the
Yeah.
track that towards a purchase, and it's just like the old phrase of greasing the skids. And I think we should be thinking about it the same way, is like, let's try to reduce the friction towards careers in healthcare wherever we possibly can. And now part of that's creating more capacity, but also just making sure that we're facilitating the process and not throwing up barriers for students.
Right. They're a very good analogy. I also think that California would be a fantastic medical education destination, and kind of shifting that perception of our state as not just come here and go to Disneyland, but that this is really a place you would consider enjoying your medical education, and having a very diverse, part of LCME and ACGME accreditation is making sure that you have that diverse experience so that you're prepared to go into practice independently. And so we've got it all, right? So let's make California that state.
But it would be great. And you're right, we do have it all. We also have a fairly high cost of living, which is,
True.
I think that's a potential barrier for students and those in training, to be able to keep a roof over their heads and pay for insurance and everything else while they're paying for their medical training. So, I think we have to be thinking about, I don't have an answer for the cost of living here, but it is something to acknowledge.
Yes. And that we do have a higher, I don't know, the salaries are in healthcare are actually part of that economic development, where you usually are paid more in the healthcare
Right.
industry than you would be in another industry.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, everywhere I've worked, even in rural areas, housing is the big question.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, well, I thank you so much for your time and thoughts. Lots to do in the future. So maybe in a year's time, we'll do another podcast and see how the plans for growth have been coming along.
That'd be great, Kristy. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and have this chat with you.
Thanks so much.
Lost my sense of humor, I found them too fun to know. Hovercrafts, blow up kayaks would have helped with angry toes, but it gave mashed potatoes. Take that meatloaf back, hi. Birthday dehydrated cake and lots of wine so nice with clean dark hair. I think it's a waltz, I think it's a waltz, but I know it's the longest 2 miles of her. I think it's a waltz, I think it's a waltz, but I know it's the longest 2 miles.